Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I am your host, Jonathan Eaterberg, and today I'll be discussing the 1929 film Weary River with my friend Jonathan Hammond, a filmmaker and past guest on the podcast who you might remember from earlier in the spring when we talked about his film Fireflies in the Dusk. Jonathan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So before we get into today's film, tell listeners a little bit more about yourself and where they can find you online.
Yeah, my name is Jonathan Hammond. I am a filmmaker, and growing up in the farm fields of central Illinois, I didn't have a lot going on, so I became too big of an Oscar fanatic, and maybe you could say expert. A lot of the knowledge has left the brain at this point, though. You can find me on Instagram at Jonohammond. That's Jonohammon. Yeah. You decided to talk about this movie.
Fantastic. Well, before we get into Weary River, I wanted to update our place in history. I'm trying to do a little bit more historical context on the podcast this season. So the last film we talked about was the Broadway Melody, which actually only came out 9 days prior to this film in February of 2019. So Broadway Melody premiered on February 1st. Then it came to New York a week later. In that time, February 4th, I saw that found a little factoid, the 1 millionth Model A Ford was completed. So they're cranking out Model A Fords back in the late 20s. February 5th, some engineers at General Electric actually made a long-distance television broadcast transmitting D.W. Griffith, both his face and voice, from a station in Schenectady, New York, all the way to Los Angeles.
Wow.
I didn't even know they were doing TV then, but obviously they're experimenting with sound in movies, experimenting with sound in television. So that's crazy.
No idea. Yeah.
And then February 7th, the Federal Reserve Board issued a warning about the excessive amount of the country's credit absorbed in speculative loans. So we all know what happens 7-8 months down the road in late 1929. So there were some warning signs. I don't know. People obviously didn't listen, but it was coming. And then on February 10th, same day as Weary River released, there's also a Douglas Fairbanks Jr. film called The Jazz Age, which was also released that same day, which we're not covering here because it wasn't nominated for an Oscar, but might be worth a look at if you like some of the other films we're talking about right now. So with that, we'll move right into the film. I've mentioned Weary River first appeared in theaters February 10th, 1929. It was directed by Frank Lloyd from a screenplay by Bradley King, with some titles by Paul Perez.
That's right, and it stars Richard Bartholomew as Jerry Larrabee, Betty Compson as Alice Gray, William Holden, not that William Holden, a different one, as the warden, and Louis Nethu as Spadoni. It has a running time of 86 minutes and was produced and distributed by First National Pictures.
And Frank Lloyd was nominated for the award for Best Director at the Second Academy Awards, along with 2 other films, which we'll get to towards the end. And the film is readily available on YouTube as well as the Internet Archive. And there's also a DVD version out there as well. So if you're looking to watch it, you could certainly find a copy somewhere to see. So we'll jump into the plot of the film, as straightforward as it is, as a lot of these films are. So Jerry Larrabee, you mentioned, is the Richard Bartholomew character. He's a prominent figure, which we soon find out he's kind of a gangster in whatever town this is that they're living in. He's out at dinner with his girlfriend Alice, and he's called away to take care of some urgent matters. And it turns out that there's been a little squabble with a rival gang led by Spadoni, which is my favorite name in the whole film. So they go and I guess he has a little meeting with his gangster friends, and they all decide to lay low a little while before Jerry heads back home to find Alice waiting for him after she leaves the little dinner party that he left her at. So they have some chit chat, him and Alice. He plays her some songs, and eventually some investigators, some detectives show up at the door and very politely introduce themselves and eventually decide to cut to the chase and throw some handcuffs on Jerry and haul him off to jail for this little gang war that resulted. It sounded like there was a innocent bystander who was killed in whatever gang warfare was going on.
Well, I think they said he was shot. You thought he was killed, and then later,
later you find out. I think he was just wounded, or we found out eventually that it was Spadoni who kind of set the whole thing up and framed him, so to speak.
right. and it's dubious if the person was actually even shot. I'm sorry, I'm gonna get ahead, but it kind of felt, so a little bit of the plot felt there were a lot of retconning going on. There was a lot of retconning, I feel like. Anyway, continue.
So we get to a trial scene. We get a very quick sentence. He's sentenced to between 1 and 10 years by the judge. And he's kind of still claiming that he's innocent, claiming he's going to be out soon. His lawyer's going to take care of things. But of course, he ends up, we see him getting fingerprinted, getting, having his picture taken in prison. And eventually he's hauled off to the warden's office when he kind of raises a little bit of a kerfuffle when they're trying to get him bathed and dressed to get situated in prison. And the warden then has a nice heart to heart little sit down with him, telling him, if you behave yourself in here, it's not going to be as bad as you think it is. Anything I missed so far?
No, you've gotten it. I will just say this is probably the most sympathetic warden character I've ever seen in a movie. It's kind of
Yeah.
the opposite of the Shawshank Redemption. He seems to really, really, really care about things.
Yeah, that was the immediate comparison I thought of, was that jerk in Shawshank is the complete polar opposite of this guy.
Yeah,
He's like a big teddy bear.
right. He's like, he is your friend.
Yeah. Yeah. He wants you to succeed. And even there's two guys in his office who were just being released before Jerry was brought in, and he gives them each $5 and they say, "Oh, we'll hope to see you again soon." And he's like, "No, I don't ever want to see you again. I don't want you back here."
Exactly. When those two guys showed up, I was wondering, like, did I miss something? Like, I rewound because I'm like, "Oh, I don't know who these characters are, the way they're introduced." And then, you see an authority figure giving people money. My first thought was they're being paid off
Right.
with this kind of gangster movie. And then I'm like, what? He's okay. He seems to be a good guy. Okay. And he was
Yep, he certainly was, and I meant to look it up and see how much $5 in 1929 would be today.
probably a few hundred.
Let's see. So $5 in 1929 is worth about $93.51 today,
Oh,
according to
wow.
the Google machine. So
Okay.
call it $100. So
Sure.
I'm not sure how far you could get with $100 coming out of jail these days, but I'm sure $5 went a lot farther 100 years ago.
Exactly.
We get some more time passes. Jerry does kind of settle down in prison, and we see him working in the laundry, I think it was. And there's kind of a sequence where Alice comes to visit him. She's talking to the warden, and she really wants to see him, but the warden is kind of shying her away from that. At the same time, there's this kind of edited in sequence of some shadows showing that someone's been executed. One of the other prisoners has been executed, and the warden kind of refers her to that man of, that could be Jerry, but we're trying to get him back on the right path.
Right. Well, the warden says I actually wrote it down because I couldn't believe it. Because, he's basically says you are a bad influence. They would use words like she's a bad one, things like that. And so, I mean, there was really no euphemisms. And I suspect the people who wrote this have never met a gangster. But he says, you and all you stand for must get out of his life. But I don't mean to insult you.
Again, being so polite.
So he basically says your reputation and your influence is going to cause him to be hung if you don't leave. She immediately starts crying. It's a really cataclysmic change of the scene. She runs out crying, and I'm like, "Whoa, they're not really going for subtlety here."
Right. And we see her a little bit later on. She's still out back at the same restaurant club where the initial scene, and she's still out partying and
Right? Yeah.
having a good time. She's getting hit on by Spadoni. He's trying to steal a guy's girl while he's in prison. So initially I thought, she wasn't quite so bad as the warden was making her out to be, but obviously she's still trying to, still hanging with the same crowd, so to speak.
What I have a question, was that club owned by Spadoni, and that's just where everyone hung out? Because they
I'm
said
not
later in the
sure.
movie, like, it's his alcohol or something, and I'm like, "Wait, why is everybody hanging out?" All the rivals are hanging out in the same club
Yeah.
owned by one of the rivals.
Right.
And I love how the word or Spadoni calls, up until this point, when there has been dialogue, we hear him say to his girlfriend, "Hey, baby. Hey, baby."
Yeah.
And then the first thing Spadoni says to her is, "Hey, baby." And I'm like, "Wait, is her name Baby, or is that just how you address
Right.
an attractive woman.
Yeah, I think that's the parlance of the times, or what they thought what they thought the gangsters talked like.
What they hey, baby. It was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Spinoni, man, he's got enough scruples.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I loved it too when they first introduced him towards the beginning when they run Jerry and him run into each other at the club before he gets arrested, and the music immediately changed. It's immediately that dun dun dun.
Right.
Something's going on there between the two of them.
And is that sort of like the idea behind this? I will admit I don't know a lot about this time or these films, and the changeover between silent to talkie. Was it just being very puritanical, like bad people hang out and drink the liquor? Is it like that? Because I know that's what it is, or is it just they're trying to show you kind of like in Goodfellas, where like, hey, we get into these great clubs, we're fancy people on the surface.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure what they meant by going to these clubs. Was the club itself nefarious, or was that just the show off
I
part?
think it's more the latter. I think it's just the show off. Just thinking back to
Okay,
some of the other ones that I've covered so far just this season. We had Our Dancing Daughters, which just released a couple weeks ago. It's a whole bunch, just a lot of people partying, rich people partying and having a good time in really fancy places. So it's a lot of that. And we talked about at the beginning the coming of the Great Depression. Obviously, the whole mood of the country is going to change in 9 or 10 months. So I think a lot of what we might see, I don't know for sure, but we might see a lot of that change in the films in the coming years. But I think it's everybody's just wanting to have a good time at this point, and this is one of the ways to show it.
so this was in the Roaring Twenties. Was alcohol had to become legal yet by this point?
I don't think so.
Okay,
I think there was still prohibition.
I'm not sure what year that Elliot Ness won.
Yeah, so prohibition was 1920 to 1933, so
Okay,
we're still in
super
that
years.
prohibition time, so yeah,
Great.
it's officially not not allowed.
Okay, they're just scoundrels.
Yes, yeah. Alice is at the club, getting hit on by Spadoni, and guy in charge, trying to think of the name, MC, whatever you will, comes out and they wheel this giant radio out in the middle of the stage in front of the band, in front of the live band. Here, we're gonna stop the live band and we're gonna have you listen to something on the radio. And of course, it's Jerry conducting his prison orchestra from prison. So they listen to a song with the orchestra, and then Jerry performs this song called "Weary River," obviously the title of the film. And it's a him solo piano and him singing, and it's very sappy song, and everybody's moved by it. And all of these calls start coming in. Oh, we want to hear it again. So 5 minutes later in the film, they play it again, and I started to get a little bit tired of that song, if I'm being perfectly
Yes.
honest.
Yes, they like, I don't wanna get ahead, but I wrote that time, like, they literally just played the song, and then they played it again in full, and they play the song 4
Yeah.
times in this 120-minute movie
Yeah, and
in
it's
in
all in that
full.
second half, like, in the last 45 minutes or so. It's just that last half of the film.
It was crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
and I
they got other
wondered
songs.
a little bit too, as I was kind of skipping through a little bit, putting notes together a second time. I was looking at him like, did they reshoot it, or did they just use a lot of those same shots of him singing over and over again throughout the various versions of that? Because there's not a lot different about the performances that I couldn't distinguish one performance of it from another one if you ask me to.
Which was really crazy. I mean, I don't wanna get ahead, but when he bombs, I'm like, this was exactly the same as what everyone was, like, going crazy over, 10 minutes ago when we
Yeah.
heard the song. So, the guy sitting on stage comes up to him, "That was terrible."
We'll actually kind of jump ahead to that. So I guess he gets some fame from this song. Everybody loves this song, Weary River. They're clamoring for it. So eventually he does make it out of prison and starts a musical performance career. But he keeps getting kind of letters from old acquaintances saying, hey, remember me from back in the day. The other performers, the audience members even are all kind of whispering convict under their breath, or the one guy even says it right to his face, which of course, he's not happy about at all. But he's trying to. You can see he's trying so hard to stay good and stay on the straight and narrow. But it's just really hard when everybody's tearing him down. So yeah, so we get that performance, the live stage performance of him doing that song, and as you say, he, I guess, bombs. Like you said, it's the same exact performance. The only difference is now they can actually see him, and he's not just a voice on the radio from prison.
And he's dressed very nicely.
Yeah,
He's like on a Broadway stage, and they're like, "He's a criminal." I'm like, "Well, yeah, they literally said that on the
yeah.
radio."
You knew he was playing from prison. What did you expect?
It was like, "Wait, this is the peaks and valleys of a screen. Like, this is an alley because he was a criminal. When we know that already."
Yeah.
Okay.
So eventually so Alice is at that one performance, and sees him. I think she tears up a little bit, so she's obviously moved by his performance. And Jerry ends up eventually running back into his old gang, and he finds out kind of the truth about his whole arrest and that Spadoni had set everything up and framed him. So he kind of vows revenge, and then he goes to confront Alice about her relationship with Spadoni and whether or not anything was actually going on there. And his friend Blackie, who's kind of seemed like the lieutenant, second in command kind of thing of the gang, comes to tell him that Spadoni's going to be coming to finish the job, so to speak, and take Jerry out the following night. So the whole crew shows up to Barney's, the bar that we saw at the beginning of the film, and then inexplicably, initially the warden shows up to talk to Jerry to kind of say, "Hey, you don't have to do this," and they try multiple times to get the warden to leave, knowing what's about to happen, and then Spadoni comes in. There's a whole gunfight. Ends up that Spadoni is dead, and the police are about to arrest Jerry, but then the warden kind of vouches for him, says he didn't even fire his gun. Okay, great. Warden says he didn't do it. I guess he didn't do it.
Once again, this is the best warden on the planet.
Yeah.
He literally just showed, and he wrote him a letter, saying, "I don't know if I can be good anymore." And he shows up and just basically saves the day.
Yeah.
Like, he just really doesn't want anybody in his prison at
Right.
all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, okay. I think this person, whoever wrote it, has zero knowledge of the legal system. Criminals, I think they're raised on a farm like me. This is like in their imagination what they think crime is.
Yeah.
Like, this leader of this whole gang is gonna all of a sudden become an orchestra leader.
Yeah. It's a bit of a stretch, but hey, it's 20s Hollywood, I guess. So, yeah, so we have that whole shootout, and the warden vouches for Jerry, and then he gives Jerry a note from Alice, where she's kind of proclaiming her love. Jerry returns to the radio station nearby, and does the final performance of Weary River that we see in the film. Thank goodness it's the last one. And Alice hears it on the radio, decides to call into the radio station, and Jerry then kind of runs out saying he's going to go meet her, but then she stays on the line and says that her address has changed and didn't get a chance. So convoluted. So he's running through the streets. Warden eventually catches up with him, and then the very last shot, I think it is, we see him just kind of running off into the distance down the street, and we presume he finds Alice and everybody lives happily ever after.
That was also one of the craziest endings for any movie. Just people are running in the opposite and it just turns out, wait, I forgot to give him my address.
Yeah.
I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, so what my takeaway from this film, and I don't know how much you learned about the production of it. I'm really curious to know how much of the actual production led to this what probably is one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was watching, if you go to the groundlings or, like Improv Olympic where they say, okay, you're, give us a suggestion and they say gangster movie. And they're kind of making it up as they go
Right.
along. It kind of felt like that way to me. You're like, it's a silent movie, new choice. It's a talkie,
Talking
new
movie
choice. It's
now.
a musical. He's a gangster. No, now he's an orchestra leader. Now it's a silent movie again. Like, it was just like constantly something was changing,
Yeah.
either in terms of plot or like the technical things. Like, it's 5 minutes, it's a silent. 5 minutes, it's a gangster movie where they have a jar and I'm like, hey, baby. And then it's a musical. And then, we probably spend, I don't know, a good 10 minutes of an hour, 20-minute movie hearing the song
Yeah.
Weary River. And then just in terms of story, it is the most all over the map thing I have ever seen. And I know some films in this era. I took an entire class in college on German cinema, so I saw a lot of the expressionistic films, and I've seen, the Fritz Lang, and I love Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. So I've and Sunrise. So I've known some silent films, and none of them are like this, and it's the most wildly unsophisticated movie I think I've ever seen in terms of, like, dialogue and plot. I mean, the dialogue was woo, and that was the letters that came up in the screen, I forget what that's called, and then the actual spoken dialogue. So I'm just really curious though, like, is it their fault? I know in this time, once the Jazz Singer came out, a lot of movies that were silent were like forced back into production or
Yeah.
partially into production to become sounds, to be like music. So I'm just really curious. I'm really curious what happened here.
I didn't find too much on the production of it in kind of general terms. The one thing I did see, and I had written down a note when I was watching it, whether or not it was actually Richard Barthelmess singing or someone else, and it's not even him. He's not playing the piano. He's not singing. He's lip syncing, and he's playing a piano that's got the strings deadened with some felt. It said so. That was the main production bit that I could find was around that singing.
Right. Very, very Singing in the Rain.
Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, it's that transition point, like you were saying. And actually, the last film that we covered, Broadway Melody, which was the Best Picture winner that year, kind of the same way. It felt like this film was there to sell records of Weary River. Like that felt like
Yeah.
the whole point of this film in the end. And oh, it's a gangster film, by the way.
Right. I've not seen Broadway Melody, and I knew that was the second Oscar winner, right?
Yes. Yep.
I mean, obviously, that would have had to come at the heels of The Jazz Singer, and it was, I'm assuming, a musical?
Yeah, that one is very much more a musical, if that makes sense. It's set in the world of Broadway stage productions and Broadway reviews and things like that. So it makes more sense for that to be a musical,
Yeah,
than this one, but it similarly doesn't work in for a lot of the same reasons. It's the story is just there to play the music, just like just
got
like
it.
it is for this film.
Did it have intertitles? Like, was it silent? No, it was all
No,
talking.
there was, I mean, maybe 2 or 3, but only just to kind of set up the passage of time or something like that. Not nearly as
Got it.
many as this one. It was essentially a full synchronized sound with
Great.
talking throughout. It was a little jarring at first, I thought, in this film, but honestly, for me, after a little while, I was like, okay, we're back to a silent part. Okay, we're
Yeah,
back. It
yeah.
didn't bother me the third or fourth time as much as it did the first time, but it was definitely a little bit of a surprise once they made that switch the first time.
What to me was the most jarring thing in the movie, and it was literally for me a laugh out loud moment. I genuinely laughed out when he was in prison, and then he has the baton, and he does the whole like I'm an orchestra. I'm the leader of an orchestra, like doing the whole conductor business, and I'm like, and we just seen him as like a gangster fighting his way, trying to because when he wanted to take a bath or something, like just being forced into jail, and then he's like all of a sudden a conductor. And I thought it was so I thought I was watching, like the SNL skit
Yeah.
or like a movie that Steve Martin would have been in the early '80s or something.
Yeah. It's funny, in watching all these movies from the first and now the second Oscars, there's a clear delineation I've found between the films where the actors are really kind of overdoing it because it's silent, and the actors in the movies where they're making it more natural even when it is silent, if that makes sense.
Right,
And
right.
this is one I think I felt this one veered more towards the overacting, even though they were now experimenting with sound. Like they hadn't quite gotten that out of their system yet to realize they could do
Yeah.
just be.
That didn't bother me as much because I knew that's what it was. I know, like was like Lee Gish who sort of like changed the paradigm for its screen acting. I didn't think they were like overacting, but it was for me that was fine. It was just more the words they had to say that really threw me because it was again it was so simplistic. They would call now that you're a bad guy, you're a bad guy. No, you have to go right. You have to like it just I felt like it was not as bad as The Room, but like whoever wrote this was just raised in a basement. And like
Yeah.
you kind of heard stories of gangsters, but you never saw one.
Yeah.
Like it didn't know what it wanted to be. Is this a musical? And again, I just like, I am curious about the production. I read so the director was nominated for best director, and then I just read before the podcast on Wikipedia, he was nominated in like
Three films
other
that year. Yeah, he was
three.
nominated for the movie Drag, which is unfortunately lost, and he won for The Divine Lady, which is coming up in a couple weeks on the
Right.
podcast. So I'm very I haven't seen that, I haven't watched that yet. That's still on my to-do list, but I'm very curious to see what the comparison is between this and The Divine Lady, which I think it wasn't too far. I mean, it sounds like those two were probably being made pretty close together in terms of when they're actually shooting and being in production. So it might be a case of he was giving more attention to one than the other, and this one was just kind of the one that fell by the wayside. But it'll be interesting to see what the difference is between those ones. I've seen both.
So he was nominated in separate, not three movies bring you one nomination. He was nominated three times in the same category.
That's how it's listed online. Yeah, I know the first Academy Awards, like Janet Gaynor was
Right.
nominated for three
For three
films,
films. Right.
and she's listed as winning for three films. But this year, I don't know if it's still kind of the same thing in the second Academy Awards, but they do have it separated everywhere that I've seen it at least.
And then he would go on to make Mutiny the Bounty,
Yep, Mutiny
which
on the
is
Bounty,
great.
and also he would actually win Best Director again a couple years later for Cavalcade, which also
Oh.
won Best Picture, I think, if I remember
That's what
correctly.
Best Picture, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I haven't seen that either.
he's obviously at the time, they thought he knew what he was doing, so
I don't like, it's one of those things, the direction was fine. It was fine. Like, I thought the composition of the shots was great. There was I know at the end of the silent era, they were able to become really experimental and really sophisticated with camera and camera movements. But once they brought in, the talkie part, they had to have the heavy microphones, so they couldn't really do that anymore. Things were kind of stationary and often dull. And so that was kind of what was nice about the film, was that it was sort of going back and forth between the like just standard shots and the moving camera. But I noticed a lot of the dialogue also felt like dubbed.
I think you're right, and it's interesting that when you're talking about the camera shots and the camera movement in the silent portions, I think it was the very first scene when they first get to the club or the restaurant before he's arrested. There's one shot where it just kind of follows them through the room, and there's people moving. It's a very dynamic shot through that scene, and I loved that. I wrote that down. There was a really cool camera move right there at the beginning. But then, yeah, you don't get as much of that once they're in those talkie scenes because they'll have to be aiming the same direction at one microphone, and the
Right.
camera's got to be in one place, so it does put some limitations on 'em.
Exactly.
So obviously, I've talked about Richard Barthelmess previously on the podcast. He was nominated for Best Actor at the first Academy Awards. I don't think he was ever nominated ever again, and he wasn't for this film, obviously. We mentioned earlier he was not actually singing; he was lip syncing and playing a fake piano. Betty Compson plays Alice. She was nominated for Best Actress this same year, but for her role in a film called The Barker, which unfortunately is another lost film. I'd love to see that film for a comparison of her performances between the two roles.
And then I thought, I mean, again, it was that very, very early. To me, that's very forgivable, the acting. I thought, for what she was doing, she was quite good
Yeah.
for that style.
Yeah, and I actually wrote a note that she really only had one big scene in the movie, and that was the kind of when he goes to confront her towards the end, before they kind of make up and before Blackie comes in to let him know what's going on. I mean, other than that, she's in a few scenes, a few short scenes. Oh, she's got the scene with the warden too, which
Yeah.
is pretty lengthy. But I wish I'd seen more of her in this film.
Yeah, I was happy with what I saw. I had nothing to add to that.
Sounds good. And then you mentioned at the top, William Holden is not the William Holden who won an Oscar in the 50s and also was in Sunset Boulevard and Network and plenty of other films. I actually found out he was born in my hometown, Rochester, New York.
Oh,
And
wow.
Weary River was his first of only about 15 or 16 films that he appeared in. He ended up passing away in the early 30s. So he got started late and unfortunately didn't get to do much. But I actually really I liked his, as much as we've talked about him being such a sweet, kind warden. It was a little refreshing to see a warden like that because we always get the mean, nasty warden in film.
Yeah. I just don't know how believable it is.
Agreed.
I mean, even if the sweetest, kindest warden ever, he like literally shows up to save the day of this guy and then convinces the police. No, 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 like he's the judge, jury.
And non-executioner.
No, 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 not him, not him. Oh, okay, sure. You're
Yeah.
the warden. You're the warden. You know best.
Not even like the chief of police or the mayor or something. He's just the warden from the prison down the road.
Well, sorry, warden.
So, anything else on any of the folks involved in the film that you wanted to touch on?
No, not really. I will say again, I don't know this era a lot. I just I know I read the book Hollywood, and I of course seen Babylon.
Yeah.
I studying it, but I really don't know. I never heard of Richard Bartholomew. I never heard of Betty Compton. I haven't heard of them or had seen them before in anything. And it just there's sort of like a sadness because you know that you're watching this and they're perfectly fine, they're very attractive, and you know that their lives are about to change
Yeah.
for the worse. And so they're, I'm gonna guess, big stars, and there's just a sadness watching them. So they were fine. It was, and they had great eyes.
Yeah, they did. That I would actually recommend anyone who wants to see more of Richard Barthelmess is the go back and look up Patent Leather Kid from the first Academy Awards. It's one of the two films that he was nominated for that survives. And I thought he was actually really good in that. Again, that's full silent, so and it's boxer slash war movie, so completely different type of story that it's telling. But I thought he was really good in that.
Is that as jarring, the sort of mix of genres as this, or is it a little more smooth?
It's a little more smooth. Split up more where he's a boxer and he kind of falls on some hard times, gets drafted into the war, goes off to fight the war, and then comes home and some things that happen there. So it makes a little bit more sense than some of the things did in this film.
So it's the Deer Hunter.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't really able to find any reviews from the time period of what the contemporary reviewers thought of it. The film is currently sitting with a 40% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is not great, and a 3.2 out of 5 on Letterboxd, which is a little better, but still not fantastic. The one modern take I saw on it, so David Inman from the website The Incredible Inman, he wrote, Weary River is well intentioned, insincere, and even a little prescient. Within a year, thanks to the Great Depression, a lot of people who saw this movie would be sailing weary rivers of their own. So I think that sums it up pretty well. It tries, but it just doesn't quite do it.
Yeah, a lot of movies try. I noticed that on Rotten Tomatoes, I don't think there's that many. I think there's only one review. I was reading the Letterboxd reviews before this, and
Yeah.
their people are very forgiving. They understand the era and what was happening. I'm just very, very curious about the production. If this was like taken away as a silent film, and you know, it's a gangster movie. No, let's make it a musical now. Like I just, if what happens in the story was determined because of the jazz singer, or like this was originally the story.
Right. Yeah.
And I know, like, when I listen to this podcast, they talk about themes and deeper meanings. I just really I love that sort of analysis, and I really don't see a lot
Yeah.
here at all.
Yeah,
I was
that's
curious if you
no, I don't. I wish there was something there too. Seeing that a lot more in these films of this transition period, that seemed to kind of go out the window a little bit when we're just trying to figure this sound thing out and get stuff into theaters so that people can hear people talking from the screen, and then we'll go figure out the story part again later.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Because I know, like, just a few years before this, they had really sort of nailed
Yeah.
silent film as a genuine art.
Yeah.
Just the storytelling, the camera work, everything. Some of those films are incredible.
Yeah.
Not all of them. And then the when sound came in, it sort of disrupted, not in the best way. They do get to putting in a couple more years,
Yep.
but
Yeah, it's definitely a period of change. As with any sort of technological change, I almost wished, we're talking earlier about how they switched back and forth from sounds to the titles and all of that throughout the film. I thinking back on it, I almost wish it had been a little bit Wizard of Oz like in that they started silent and then the middle was all sound and then they ended silent or something like that to use it
Something,
as a
yeah,
gimmick, so to speak.
right. And I think also not knowing what they were doing and really affected the pace. And there were just moments that it was like some of the most bonkers story telling I've ever seen. It was also slog, lot of it. This is just like, okay, let's, you don't want to show her walking across the room.
Right.
Just, there was a lot of that.
Yeah, it could have used some more editing to, I would have been much happier with this at 60 to 70 minutes rather than whatever it was, 80, 85, 85 to 90.
Yeah, or reshoot the scenes,
Yeah.
make it all sound. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or
Yeah.
like you said, a gimmick. That would have been interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I mean, this was a time period where they were just
Trying to figure
Frank
it out.
Lloyd's doing 3, 4, or 5 movies at a time, probably, and so
Right.
they couldn't give that time, which I'm sure contributed to that. But yeah, definitely some room for improvement in this one.
Have you encountered like other movies like this where it's going from silent to sound to musical to silent, like anything that's this like as much of a roller coaster?
Not to this extent, no. The
Okay.
closest one is Broadway Melody from last week. Again, that's straight musical, but musical for the sake of putting music in and doing sound on film. But nothing that's as schizophrenic as this.
Okay.
Anything else you want to mention before we give some final thoughts and readings?
No, I mean, I just watching this, I thought this could be something of a drinking game. Like, there's so many different. Anybody out there like needs a new drink? Anytime they play Weary River or anytime they go silent, like I don't know. There's a million opportunities here. I think you could have people that have a lot of fun with it,
Sure.
but otherwise, I don't know if I would recommend it unless you just are curious about the novelty of something so bizarre.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll give my rating first. Initially, I was going to say a 6, like a very low 6 out of 10, but I think I'm going to drop it down to a 5. I can't quite bring myself to give it anything more than a 5 at this point. That story, it's just so convoluted. There really is no story. I mean, you can summarize the plot in 2 lines if you really had to, much less time than we took to do it.
Yeah.
But the first time you hear Weary River, it's okay. It's an okay song, but the fact that I have to hear it 4 times starts to knock it down a few pegs. So I think I'm gonna end up going with a 5 out of 10 on this one, kind of right down the middle of the road.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll give it a 5 as well. There is an there is an element of like I don't think it's a good movie because I don't think the script knows what it is. And I'm just gonna right now, I don't know what happened what with the production, but I will just assume this is the script. If that's the case, they didn't know what they're doing, but it had just the simplicity of the oversimplicity of the dialogue, and there were so many WTF moments that like literally had to be, and particularly, you were talking about the end. I'm like, I actually forgot that. And then because of that, there's like a showgirls quality to it, which I think could be really fun if you're like watching it with people. So I'll give it a 5. It's not good, but it has enough that it could make for an entertaining screening
Sure.
if the conditions were right.
Yeah. And you had a good drinking game to go along with it.
Right. Right. Right.
Well, I will include a list of resources to any of the links and articles that we mentioned in the episode, as well as where you can watch Weary River for yourself if you decide to brave that after our conversation about it. Jonathan, thanks again for coming on the show to talk about the film, and just remind people once more where they can find you online.
You can find me online at Jonathan Hammond on Instagram, JONOHAMN, and this was really fun. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And don't forget to follow The Oscar Project at theoscarproject.substack.com. And be sure to come back for next Friday's episode of the podcast where I will be discussing the film The Leatherneck. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the movies.
At every weary